Now, I bet where you live, just like where I live, the demand for eggs is skyrocketing, even though the price has gone up. So is the demand, though, for chickens. That's because the price of eggs has doubled in the past few weeks since the bird flu has wiped out millions, something like 150 million hen-laying chickens across the country. There are stores that have been selling out fast of the little chicks. So one store owner said that they get about 200 to 300 chicks every Thursday, and they sell out within 24 hours. And if you can imagine somebody being thrust into that position that they want to start raising chicks and don't know where to begin except at the store where they sell the chicks, good luck to them. And so would what my guest would say. You heard her giggling in the background. From chickensforeggs.com, our resident chicken expert, Cherie Glover, is with us. And she is a poultry health inspector. She is an urban chicken consultant. And she is a master beekeeper as well. Now, I think the last time we talked, actually, you were a master beekeeper apprentice. Are you a full master now?
I'm not. I think I'm actually I like diversity in my educational resources. So I may actually be working on getting my master's in beekeeping, but through a different university or different organization, because there's so much out there. University of Florida does a good one, in Montana. Anyhow, I think it's always good to take as many classes as you can and increase your knowledge. And that diversity of knowledge, I think, is really, really important. So I'm not quite there yet, but UC Davis was also a great program. So yeah, worth it.
Very good. All right. By the way, back in 2024, we had a similar conversation when the bird flu was just breaking out or starting to spread. And we were complaining about the price of eggs back then, that it would soar up to $6 a dozen. But wasn't it just $2 last week? And now all of a sudden we're looking at, $9 a dozen or more, depending on the supply that they have?
Yeah, exactly. It's been so funny to watch social media, and there are some crazy memes that have been coming out, and boy, you're rolling in it if you had chickens, because those eggs are worth so much. And it's funny because I'll see people they'll do regular posts on Facebook and social media about, okay, I was just in Costco and they have, 4 pallets of eggs. So quickly go over there and get them. It's like toilet paper was during COVID. But the price, I've seen it all over the place. I was watching a YouTube, actually on gardening, but a YouTube thing. And it was funny because her chickens hadn't started laying yet. And so she's like, come on, chickens, we gotta get going here. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it's normal for your laying hens to take a break when the daylight hours decrease. And a lot of people think that chickens lay, because of how hot or cold it is. While the temperature changes will affect, sometimes production, like when we're in the heat of the summer here in the, northern Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley area, Sacramento Valleys, it gets so hot that, your chickens might take a break for a few days from laying eggs, but people forget that it's actually associated with the number of daylight hours. So you add that on top of the shortage, right? You have to consider too that, how long it takes to hatch a chick, right? And then raise it up to laying hen age, which is typically 6 to 8 months. And boy, it was like the perfect storm, of eggs.
Well, this is where I really want to start the conversation. It's that couple that are complaining about the price of eggs and come to the decision, well, we'll raise our own. If there is an accountant in the family, they would have to ask, well, wait a minute, at what point do you break even in raising chickens and caring for them versus paying $9 or so for a dozen eggs once a week? I imagine that you have some figures on that as far as how long it takes to basically get back your investment in this project.
Well, and it's going to take a while, right? Because look at how much feed costs right now. The cost of feed, if you've never had chickens, how do you have a predator-safe chicken coop, right, to keep your hens? And how many hens do you need? And are you going to try and pay top dollar for hens, or I guess pullets, right? Pullets are basically laying hens that are under a year old, female chickens. So pullets, are you investing in paying for pullets that are already at laying age? Because it takes 6 to 8 months for those female chickens, those pullets, to mature enough to actually lay those wonderful, fresh, delicious eggs. And here we are, are you ready to invest that time? Or are you going to buy baby chicks and make sure that you have a brooder in place and everything you need to kind of raise them up to that stage, right? That level. So there's some choices to make, and it doesn't always pencil out. And the feed itself is a huge, huge expense, because when your chicks are younger, right, you're feeding them something called chick starter, which is, basically baby food for baby chickens. And it's usually higher protein, so you're paying a little bit more, and you're graduating them up to, a layer feed that's maybe like 16% protein by the time they're 6 to 8 months old. So there's a little more to it. And so that's why I think it's so funny, for me as a consultant, okay, it's great business for me. People want to learn how to raise their chickens. That's especially important because there's so much misinformation online right now. But the ones that just want to run out and grab some chicks and, hey, we can do this, they'll quickly find that it's not always as easy as advertised and more expensive. You could get your basic put together coop, cookie cutter kind of coops that you might fit in your backyard, but some folks will pay thousands of dollars for some really designer type chicken coops. And so you kind of have to think about, well, what do I need right now? What am I going to need 6 months from now? What am I going to need 2 years from now? The good thing is that it's a good resellable market. So if you keep chickens for a couple of years and then you're like, oh, I'm not really into this anymore. Or maybe you get your first rooster in the batch of, the chicks that you've ordered through an online hatchery, then you're like, okay, maybe we were cut out for this. Or what's really, really sad is when people don't follow maybe the best practices for raising their chicks and then they end up not making it. That's pretty devastating.
I've been reading some online information about chicken basics from all over the world. And what gets repeated again and again is the fact that you have to be there for your chickens. You need to visit your chickens at least twice a day, and you can't leave overnight. You can't go for a weekend away for Valentine's Day, for example. You have to have somebody watching them.
Well, all hell could break loose, and your chicks could be in trouble. You are truly that mother hen. And if your chicks, when you get them, so if you purchase them online and then ship them to your home, they're typically, they usually ship them as 1 day old chicks, right? And that's because baby chicks are able to sustain themselves. They basically absorb, when they're hatched, they absorb actually the egg yolk, and that's what feeds them for 2 to 3 days after they're hatched. So it gives them a kind of a little bit of a period of where they don't have to have food and water right away. And that's what allows companies or hatchers to actually ship out the birds to your home. When they are young, they literally can drown. If you don't have the right waterer, they can very, very easily drown. If they ingest, maybe you've used the wrong kind of litter or padding for the bottom of your brooder, they could suddenly swallow something and choke. And it's not until they're probably about 2 or 3 weeks old where you can relax a little bit. So timing is everything. You've got to figure out when you're going to be home, or at least have a friend or neighbor that has raised chicks before that might be able to come over and take care of them if you're gone for the weekend. Whatever you do, though, don't just surprise, it's Valentine, today that we're talking, it happens to be Valentine's Day, but, don't surprise your spouse with some brand new baby chicks and not have anything prepared.
Right.
Because
you save that for Easter.
You save that for Easter. Right. Surprise! They're beautiful, bright colors because they've dyed them, in the egg. But no, it's because they are very sensitive to heat and cold, for at least until they're fully feathered, which can take up to 2 months. So you need to make sure that your spot is already prepared, it's already warm, and being able to have everything ready will make it so much easier. There's tips and tricks that you learn along the way. Some people think that you can just keep them in a wired pet cage kennel, and that doesn't work because it doesn't retain the warmth, right? It doesn't allow you to kind of control that air temperature. So coming up with things like the heat lamps, a well-insulated area that has at least some airflow at the top, things that allow those birds to be in a climate-controlled area for a while is important.
There are a lot of areas we could delve into. Yeah. And what my first concern would be, if I'm ordering chicks online, how do I know that what I'm getting is going to produce eggs as opposed to, say, I don't know, an odd rooster or two who will wake up at 3 a.m. and start crowing.
Well, so they will typically tell you online. So you can either get standard run, which if you see the standard run, that basically means you have a 50-50 chance of each chick being a male or a female. Of course, the females are what you need to lay eggs. You do not need a male. You do not need a rooster, because basically that female hen is ovulating, right? So what she's producing and what she's laying, those eggs are not fertilized, right? Unless you have a rooster in your coop. The good thing is you don't need the crowing roosters to be able to get those fresh eggs each day. But you're looking for specifically for them selling those chicks as pullets. And that's the term you want to look for. If it says standard run, that means you have chances of each one of those chicks being 50-50. It's either a male or a female. So always look for pullets. The other thing to consider is that hatcheries, they try to be really, really helpful, and they figure you might lose a couple of chicks along the way, so they throw in extras. Some hatcheries are more notorious for doing this than others. And it's kind of cool when you first think about it. Oh, I'm getting a few extra birds. Hey, wonderful. But many times you don't know what breeds they are. They literally just toss them in, and you don't know if they're male or female. So you end up with these extra chickens, and you're like, I don't know what these are or what they're going to be. And it's kind of like, it's kind of like those, subscriptions of the month club kind of thing where you never know what you're going to get. It's like that. And you won't know for a couple months what it is.
So you can't tell. If you went to, say, Tractor Supply or some place, some feed store that gets in the baby chicks, you can't look at those baby chicks and say, oh, you're a rooster and you're a laying hen.
By the time you see them in the store, they're typically too old. So there is a method that you can use having to do with their wing feathers, but you have a very small window of time in which to catch them. And most people that use that method are hatching the eggs themselves and the chicks. So literally within a day or two, they're able to see them. But by the time that you see the chicks, especially if you see them in the feed store or Tractor Supply or any one of those suppliers, they are relying on the hatchery to be able to tell them what they are. And that's why, because they're sexing them, right? At the hatchery level, you do have some chickens and some poultry. They're very interesting where they're sex linked, which means that if they're a certain color, they know they're only going to be a certain color if they're male or female, depending on what they are. So you have with those breeds, you can tell which ones are which pretty easily because it's the color of their feathers is different. But for most chickens, you won't notice until they get a little bit older and they start developing their wattles, right? Which is what hangs under their little chinny chin chins on their necks and then below their beak. And then it's basically their comb on the top of their head. Sometimes you can tell with plumage, you can tell with body type, the way the bird is shaping up as it gets older. Sometimes too, you can tell by behavior. And that's where it gets interesting because the male birds tend to be more dominant. They want to kind of establish a pecking order, even as chicks. And the ones that tend to want to kind of boss everybody else around in the brooder tend to be males. So sometimes if you're watching for that, you can see it, but most people don't really spend that time or effort. So it's a surprise. Oh,
is there a market for that surprise?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think most people want to know what they're getting. And if they live in an urban environment and they're faced with, oh, great, now I have a bird that's trying to crow, which is probably a male. What do I need to do with this now? Luckily, in our area, particular area around Sacramento and San Joaquin, there are some livestock auctions that happen where you can take those older birds and go sell them. But with this whole, avian influenza thing, I don't know which auctions are still going at the moment. I'll have to check on that. But there may be restrictions on the birds even being able to sell them at that point. So people can either try to find a home for it, in the private market, or they maybe go ahead and raise up that bird and maybe use it for meat. It just kind of depends. It depends on the person and the family and what they want to do.
We have discussed this many times on this podcast. We've talked about backyard chicken basics, for example. We've talked about the varieties and how to choose a backyard chicken as far as the breed goes. We've talked about even growing your own chicken food as well as raising chicks and hens. But I'll have a list of all your previous appearances here on the podcast that people can go to And
Oh, very good.
but if they listen to those or read the transcript, they'll have a complete encyclopedia on chicken basics. What are some good basic books, though, for raising chickens or websites?
I love the Stories Guide, which is done by Gail Devereaux. And her books are always fantastic, no matter what the subject matter. But her particular ones on poultry are pretty good. And those are really my go-tos. There are some that are out there from Andy Schneider, or he was AKA the Chicken Whisperer. His are pretty good, and I love his approach. He's very scientific. He wants people to be able to make educated decisions about their poultry and what they're feeding them and how they're raising them. And he's worked in the past. I think he's retired now, actually, but he worked very hard to challenge some of those misnomers out there about poultry raising, because what you'll more commonly find, which is really unfortunate, is just a lot of misinformation. And part of that is with social media. It's with websites. There's some that I would never refer people to because, oh my goodness, you're going to get bombarded with, oh, this is what I do, but they aren't able to actually, scientifically substantiate why they do what they do. And there is an aspect of a lot of people see their backyard chickens as pets. They have names. They love to watch them. They're pretty fascinating creatures. But there is a scientific approach when it comes to solving problems that I think it's really important in order to be effective, to be able to have that knowledge. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that protein is an important staple in a chicken's diet, especially to produce eggs. And I think a lot of people, maybe one of these myths you're referring to or poor information that might be online is, oh, you can not concentrate so much on buying that chicken feed and just feed them table scraps. But is that
Right.
such a good idea?
Well, the thing is, chickens are like any animal, right? So they need to have a good foundation of feed, especially if you're expecting something from them. So if you want laying hens and you want them for eggs, then you need to make sure that they're nutritionally complete. And that's what's fascinating about chickens. They inherently and nutritionally know what they need. And that's why the foraging aspect is so important. So when they're out in the garden or out in your yard and they're foraging around, it's amazing they know what to eat. They know what to pick through, and they have excellent eyes. So they're able to really kind of get down and dirty and scratch and figure out what it is that they need to consume. The problem with feeding them just the kitchen scraps is there could be stuff in there that maybe they can't eat, maybe aren't good for chickens. It may be a good way to kind of get rid of those food scraps. There's some name for all those kitchen scraps that you keep on the table. And even, I have to say, I just remembered something when I was thinking back. When I was a child, my grandparents had chickens. And my grandmother, she used to, because they didn't have garbage disposals or anything like that. So what they would do is she would take a milk carton, the big 1 gallon jug, and she cut a big hole out of it. And that's where things like the eggshells would go, the banana peels, all those kinds of scraps would go into that bin. And then every couple of days, Grandpa would take it out and he'd throw it out to the chickens. But they also, they used also a chicken feed, and it was just your basic one, grain-based from the feed store. If you want to get the most eggs possible, they have to have that balanced nutrition. So that means not just feeding them treats like those dehydrated worm treat things that you can get in huge bags. In fact, I was at Tractor Supply, and the bag must have been like 2 feet by 2 feet. It was huge, of these mealy worms. And then, things like the scratch, the cracked corn, all that is really candy for those chickens. And I have to laugh because, our chickens, a lot of times our laying hens, they have kind of a weight problem. They're not as lean as they used to be. And that's because we've gotten used to feeding our chickens all these extra treats. Long story short, is that, yeah, they really do need that complete nutrition, that foundation feed, whether it's a pellet or a crumble. And those are two different forms that are most common. You can sometimes find different size pellets. I tend to gravitate towards the smaller pellets because my bantams, which are a miniature sized chicken, they tend to eat those up, I think, a little more quickly. When you get them in either pellet or, the granules types of form, your chickens are going to figure out what they like. And and then you can add stuff from there. So kitchen scraps are okay, but you need to make sure that they have that foundation feed along with it.
I like the tip that you mentioned as far as if you ask your friends who raise chickens what they do. Remember, all they're telling you is about their experience. They don't have the science to back them up. And in the past, you've mentioned some experts who do have the science behind them, like from the UC Davis Veterinary Department, Dr. Maurice Pitesky and Dr. Nancy Reimers have some excellent information online about feeding your flock that we'll have a link to in the show notes. And I really, they do mention that some of the things that you should not feed your chickens, and that includes things like chocolate and avocados.
Yes, I know. I'm like, who would want us? And honestly, some of it's just like common sense. I mean, really, who wants to feed their chickens chocolate? It's just an odd thing. But there's things like the nightshade type plants, right? Yeah. So potatoes, tomatoes,
rhubarb, pepper, potato, eggplant.
Yeah. Even like things like raw beans, garlic, things like garlic and onion. And that people have a lot of scraps with, right?
Yeah.
And you'll always get some people out there to go, I just feed them onion all the time and they're fine. And that's good for them. But again, you have to kind of understand the biology, and, there's some things that really chickens shouldn't eat. Even something like coffee. People like tobacco has come up, and that's because back in the day, people would smoke a lot, and some people, I guess, would just toss the butts on the ground or something. Well, a chicken, discerning as they are, if they're very curious, and if it looks interesting, they might try to eat it.
Well, it is a tobacco leaf after all.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see that. But Dr. Pitesky points out that you do not feed chickens alcohol or tobacco.
Right. It's too bad that we have to remind people of that.
Really?
Maybe that wouldn't be so good.
There's nothing so sad as to go into your backyard and see your chickens gathered playing a game of poker with a bourbon in one hand and a Marlboro in another.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just sad.
Oh, man. But, so it's one of those things where, use your common sense and know the biggest culprit for chicken death or illness, if it's not all this other stuff, is mold.
Mold?
So
okay.
Mold will kill your chicken faster than anything else. They just can't handle it. So if your chicken feed happens to get wet, right, and moldy, throw it out. Do not take any chances. Don't let them get a hold of moldy feed. And that with our, the rains just had recently, that's what can happen is there could be a water leak, or water could get into your feed buckets or however you keep your chicken feed. Just to make sure if anything gets moldy, don't take a chance, throw it out. If you have ducks, the ducks can handle the moldy feed. At least that's what if I have feed that's a little bit moldy, but not horrible, I can still get it out to the ducks.
I would think too that the bedding might be subject to mold too. So it's important to get out there and clean out where the chickens live.
Yeah, the chickens are not ducks. So if you have some flooding, or if you have, oh my gosh, chickens in, their pen has standing water, right? With all the rains that we've had and stuff too. You need to get them out as soon as possible. Yeah, you can wash a chicken, right, to get ready for a poultry show, but they should have protection from the elements, and that includes rain and water too. Make sure that they have a nice, dry, warm environment to live. And there's always debates about bedding. What kind of bedding is best? And you really have to figure out which one works best for you. But what I have found interesting is that a lot of people try to use straw like they would for other livestock. But the problem with straw is that it does mold. It doesn't really absorb anything. It kind of gets in the way. The chickens have a hard time walking over it because it's very stiff, and it's not easily to have a big rake, but it doesn't absorb anything. And same thing goes with sand. It seems like every couple of years there's a big push or trend to use sand in your chicken coops. To me, sand is like a cat litter. And unless you get like the clumping kind, it's not really going to absorb anything, right? And are you really going to go out there and scoop your chicken coop every other day? I don't think most people are. So, because
should it be done on an irregular basis?
So a lot of people have found the easiest method is what they call the deep litter method. And that's where maybe 2 or 3 times a year, they completely scoop everything out. They clean out the entire chicken coop. And then they may sanitize it, and then they'll go ahead and put on a light layer of pine shavings. And then they just add maybe every week or so, just more pine shavings just on top. And what that does is it allows things to kind of dry out, allows things to settle kind of to the bottom. But in order to use that method effectively, you really have to keep it dry. If you do have a wet spot in your chicken run, that makes it maybe a little bit easy because you can just scoop out that section. But the chickens will naturally scratch, which helps aerate the litter. It'll help dry it out. And then you put that fresh layer on top and you just keep doing that until if it gets to the point where you're seeing more poop than litter, fresh, wood shavings, then it's definitely time to clean that all out. So depending on how many chickens you have and how old they are, can influence how quickly you have to change that all out. It's a simple method and it's the least expensive because quite honestly, pine shavings, you can get large bales of them at the feed store for $5 or $6, and that's going to last you a while.
Does the coop need ventilation to take the ammonia fumes away from that pot?
It does. You want ventilation without the birds. This is always the trick. You want ventilation without the birds feeling like they're getting windblown, right? There's too much. So a lot of people will put ventilation maybe towards the top. Sometimes they'll put it kind of near the bottom. So you still want the birds to stay dry. You don't want them to have drafts, but you want there to be some level of airflow. You don't want the chickens whipping around in the wind.
One interesting technique I saw, chickens can take the cold much better than they can take the heat. And for those areas of the country that get a lot of heat in the summertime, one ingenious thing I saw was that there is a trend in hotter areas for coops to actually be raised off the ground so there is shade beneath them and allows the chickens to go beneath them for some afternoon shade.
Mm-hmm. That's something that people forget. They're always worried about the winter. Unless you live in like Minnesota or someplace where, if the ground is frozen, there's lots of snow, you're going to take different precautions when you live, in that type of environment. But it's not really the cold we have to worry so much about, right? Chickens are kind of built for being able to snuggle down in their feathers and stay warm. And you'll see them do this in cold environments. If they're on a roost, it allows them to kind of nestle down over their feet to keep their feet warm. And then they tuck in their little heads right under their wing and they keep their comb and their wattles warm and their little chicken faces warm too. So it's not the cold. They'll figure that out, but it's the heat. And anytime you can provide shade, pay attention to, okay, where does my yard get the most sun at the end of the day? Do they have any shaded areas? Do they have some protection? And especially in the really warmer areas. So any place where it gets over, say, 90 degrees, you're thinking about the heat. And that means maybe having fans, maybe on a timer. Some people will use misters. The only challenge with a mister is they can often clog up. And then you create pools of water and maybe not the best water for the chickens to drink out of. And chickens will gravitate towards that, unfortunately. So you want to eliminate any puddle or water kind of accumulating. And then something that rabbit folks use that a lot of poultry or chicken folks now use are frozen water bottles. And this is the greatest thing because you're not having to deal with something melting, right? And then creating a water puddle. But you can take those 2-liter bottles or whatever size bottle you need, put water in it, freeze it, and then you put those throughout your chicken run. And they work really well because the chickens, and they not only radiate, cooler temps, right? A little bit of coolness, but the chickens can lay next to them and cool off if they need to. And you're going to be able to wash them off and just refreeze them again. It works pretty well.
We talked about the chicken coop, but we should point out that chickens also need outdoor activity. They need at least a run. What are the dimensions of a run, and what sort of security do you need for your entire backyard if they have free range of your backyard?
So you definitely want a run that gives them enough space to scratch around. And they used to recommend for a large size standard chicken, right, which is your typical laying hens, they used to recommend a space of 2 feet by 2 feet, which actually is not that big. But those are what the commercial industry often use, right, for the ones that are not cage free. Your chicken run should give them enough space to, and again, it depends on the number of chickens that you have, but your typical space for, say, maybe five chickens, is you could get away with maybe, see, and I'm trying to visually now measure this with my brain, possibly like 3 feet by 5 feet. That's kind of big though, maybe 4 feet. And the reason it can change is because your space can change, right? You want them to have enough room where they each have their own space, even though they're a flock. It allows you to give them the space to scratch and to roam around. And if you have your whole yard, the great thing about that is that, say you get home from work, you open up the chicken coop, they're out there. What's great is that they're eating bugs, they're scratching, and really being able to scratch the dirt and the grass is very stress relieving for the chickens. And they've seen that behaviorally. So you give them free rein, but the thing you have to then think about is your predators. And no matter where we live, no matter, it seems, if whether we're in an urban environment or a rural environment, you're going to have things like raccoons. You're going to have things like opossum. You're going to have hawks. You're going to have, out here, we have a big problem with coyotes, right? Things that love to be able to run up, grab one, and leave, like fast food. So, you have to keep that in mind. Also keeping in mind, if you're in an urban environment, right, where are your neighbors? Are they going to, I think there are restrictions. Each ordinance is a little bit different for each town or city, but many of them will have requirements that you have to keep the coop so many feet away from that property line. So you have to pay attention to that. But a lot of people, unfortunately, it comes down to their own household dogs.
Yeah.
So, and where they're thinking, oh, my dog will be okay with the chicken, or somebody forgets that the chickens are out in the backyard. They're not in their coop, and I'm going to let, Sammy out to go potty. And then you hear a lot of horrible sounds and feathers everywhere, and now your chicken is gone. So it's very sad, but it's very often people's own pets that will cause harm to the chickens. They're the biggest predator.
It sounds to me like that run probably needs to be the perimeter or beyond the perimeter of the coop itself, but still enough of an enclosed area that is secured with good quality, maybe 1/4-inch mesh fencing to keep predators out. And because we're going to dovetail into bird flu, a cover as well, some sort of netting on top.
Yeah. Yeah.
By the way, speaking of dogs, we are broadcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the Butelon Jungle, as you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, so the hardwire cloth is important, and that's because chicken wire is often very large, right? It's funny, poultry and chicken wire actually isn't really meant for chicken coops. It has wonderful other uses, but it doesn't work well for chickens or chicken coops. And that's because you can get things crawling through. It's easy to rip through if you're a predator. It doesn't really protect your chickens the way that they need to be protected. Things can bite through it. So hardware cloth is really the best material. Then remembering that a lot of our predators out there can dig underneath, and they can climb over the top. That outdoor run is really meant for the chickens to spend most of their daylight hours. They're interacting, they're scratching, they're looking at things. That's kind of their outdoor area. Whereas the coop itself is meant to be a protected space that's where the birds will roost, right? And sleep at night. Maybe it will have an area for the eggs, to collect the eggs and for them to lay eggs in the nest. And it's climate controlled space that gives them a place to go if the weather's not good, or if it's too hot, that kind of thing. Gives them that indoor protection. So your typical chicken coop has both. It has the run that's connected and the coop part. And sometimes you'll see them built where it's all in one, and the chicken coop is raised like you were talking about earlier, or the coop is raised and the chicken run is underneath, and it's all enclosed. Those are really great for if you're in small spaces, or you can get something even larger depending on the amount of space you have in your yard, where you can have a full chicken coop that's tall enough for you to actually walk in, right, and collect things and clean. And then the run can be the same thing. And that's a big kind of tip and pointer right there, is make sure that you have a coop that you can access comfortably so that you can easily clean it out. Because if it's not easy to clean, guess what? You're probably not going to clean it as often. It's just human nature.
Yeah, and you want to be able to easily access it to lock it up at night or to collect eggs too.
Oh, totally. And so there's some that are built where you don't even have to go inside the coop to collect the eggs. They have almost like a little shelf compartment kind of thing on the back and has a lid, and all you have to do is lift it up and oh my gosh, there's the eggs. And that makes it super easy because at least you can kind of contain them. And chickens are pretty good at figuring out where to lay, right? They like to find private kind of dark spaces where they can kind of hide. And that goes back to their bird-like nature, their avian behavior, where they need to protect their eggs and their clutch. And so being able to have a space that's a little confined, a little dark, a little kind of secretive is always a great thing when you're thinking about nests and for the eggs. That's why, like, for instance, people will say, oh, I let my chickens run around the yard and I can never find the eggs. And that's because that hen has found a wonderful little spot underneath that, that bush, to where they have a little secret spot to go to. So sometimes the chickens can get creative.
You mentioned that you need to keep the predators out because some can dig underneath the fence. How deep should that foundation of that fence be into the ground?
They usually say no less than 6 inches, which is kind of a lot, right? Especially depending on the kind of ground or dirt that you have. So they say 6 inches, and they say it should go straight down and then come out away from the structure. And I've seen some laying coop plans where they'll, instead of digging down, they'll build up. So they'll put in the foundation of the chicken coop, and then they put soil on top of that. And you can use hardwire cloth. Some people use like cement blocks or bricks, surrounding their coop on the outside. So there's a lot of different ways that they can do it. But I believe that it's no less than 6 inches. So you really do have to dig down pretty deep.
Now, the reason a lot of these people are going to the feed stores or the big stores that carry the chicks is because of the price of eggs. The price of eggs have gone up because of the bird flu. So let's talk a little bit about this bird flu that's going around. It's affected something like 159 million poultry as of today, and I'm sure those numbers are just going to go up. This is information from the Center for Disease Control, and I'm mentioning this because although it's great information they have at the CDC, I don't know how long this information is going to stay online, frankly. But you may want to check that out because they have a lot of good tips on preparing your chicken and its home for bird flu to protect it from, because one of the areas of infection are wild birds that come by. Yeah.
We're into the main flyway for waterfowl. So the birds, they're coming over us every day. And that's what happens is unfortunately, they bring it in. And it doesn't impact the waterfowl as much, but it can spread, right? So that's where we have to be really, really diligent when it comes to biosecurity. And when you were talking earlier about the cover, so that's why, you don't want your chicken coop or chicken run to be able to be visited by waterfowl. And a few years back, we had a back pasture that we used just for ducks. And at the time we had about 30 ducks. And it was so funny because, I went out there and I saw this pair of ducks and I'm like, where did they come from? Because they were Muscovies, and Muscovy ducks are ones that kind of have like a wrinkly section of skin kind of above their beak. They're very prominent, and I didn't have Muscovies. And so I thought, and I kind of thought to myself, and I thought, I wonder if somebody dumped them out here. But then I started rationally, logically thinking it through, and I'm like, nobody would have been driven down here without us knowing. And then, what are they going to do? Here you go, I'm going to dump this duck because we don't want it anymore. Because these birds were perfectly happy, in this pasture. And then I ran back in, got my phone, came back out, was trying to take a picture, and they flew off. And then I realized, I thought, oh my goodness, they were just passing through. They saw the other ducks. They saw, the water we had available. They saw the feed, and it was a truck stop for them.
Yeah.
So that's how easy it can be. And really, I don't know how long they were there. That's how easy something can happen. But it's really a challenge to not be so paranoid that you're taking all these precautions that are impacting your life. But, you want to take logical, reasonable precautions. And so for me as a backyard chicken owner, it means making sure that my chickens are in an enclosed space that, wildfowl, if they stop in, they're not going to have direct access to the chickens. Do I use a foot bath for my show poultry? Yes. My show poultry are in a barn that's been converted on the inside to chicken coops. Before I go in and out of there, I'm using the foot bath. I monitor my visitors. If they have chickens, then I typically won't give them a tour of the chicken coops. And that's just taking an extra precaution because you never know. And these things are carried in by our shoes, by our clothing, as well as the waterfowl themselves. Like, for instance, if I go to Oak Grove Park, I want to say it has water. They have geese out there. Beautiful, beautiful open park area that you can go and spend time in. But I know that if I walk out there's a good chance I'm going to, what shoes am I wearing? And am I tracking anything back into my own, backyard chickens? So a really good practice is to have one pair of boots or one pair of shoes that you only use in your chicken yard. And that's the only place you wear them. And that really helps contain it. You're not bringing in other things. Can we evade all the risks out there? Oh, it's really, really hard. But at least you can, if you understand the biosecurity practices, right, how things are transmitted, how things are spread, at least then you can make logical, reasonable changes to what you do to help prevent that spread. And for right now, I think the way it's impacting me the most is that our poultry shows, right, our ABA and APA sanctioned shows are now shut down in California because they're concerned about the spread of the avian flu. So we don't get to show our poultry, and then we don't get to visit with our fellow poultry practitioners. I wonder if that's a thing.
Well, that includes 4-H'ers too.
Right. All the 4-H'ers, the FFA, the Grange kids, all of those kids, can't participate either. And that's a huge part. Those youth programs are a huge part of those poultry shows. It reminds me, what's going on now reminds me a lot of when we had brilliant Newcastle or exotic Newcastle back in like the early 2000s, because it was, oh my gosh, that just shut everything down. Things like our fairs. I certified by CDFA as a poultry health inspector. And so what that means is fairs and expos will hire me to come in and do just general health checks of the bird. And so there's a good chance, since probably I would doubt that all of this is going to get solved by state fair times, that, last year I did state fair. This year, there probably will not be poultry at the state fair.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's sad. That's sad.
And then there's stories every day in the press about how the bird flu is spreading, that cats are getting it, people are getting it. But the facts are slim, and I think facts are going to be slimmer to find. All the CDC is saying at this time is it's using its flu surveillance systems to monitor for H5 bird flu activity in people, whatever that means.
It's funny because people will typically, what I've seen at least on the poultry world, is that people are either overreacting or underreacting. So they either think, oh, this isn't going to happen to me, and they're still kind of doing business as usual, not really taking any precautions. And then you have the others that are like extreme, like, my chicken coop is Fort Knox. I'm not gonna visit any of my friends or, that have birds or chickens. I'm not gonna go anywhere near their house. All of these different things where there could be waterfowl. Like, you can take it one extreme to the other. And that's why it's so important to understand how it spreads, and then understand, okay, what do I need to do in my own yard? I was up in the Oroville, Chico area recently of California, and I got to kind of see someone's set up for a local, they were church associated, and they had like a local food bank type thing, and they had a flock of chickens. And so one of the things that I recommended was, making sure that it's covered, because they do have a pond on the property, and those water ponds are what attract the waterfowl. And that's really what's going to bring it in more so than possibly, an individual or people. But again, you don't know.
To get to Chico and Oroville, you had to go through Yuba City. And we've talked about this before. Yuba City allows chickens to roam free throughout Yuba City. It's a city ordinance. And I would think that with all this bird flu going around that they've somehow managed to control the populations. Did you go through Yuba City?
I did. No, I totally drove through Yuba City in '99, and I saw all the chickens on the side of the road over by the Carl's Jr. They were all out there pecking around, doing their thing. And so I thought, in fact, I almost stopped and took a picture of them because I thought, oh, this will be fun to share. But they're all up and down the corridor. They live in the trees and the bushes and stuff all along the highway. So yeah, it's and that's, I think, maybe if I was a backyard chicken flock owner in Yuba City, I think that's what I would be concerned with because they're exposed to so much. And how do I take, I just don't want those. If I lived close to that area, I just wouldn't want those chickens to come over into my neighborhood.
Well, you may not even want to walk where they walk either. Right.
That's how, you kind of have to, a lot of poultry exhibitor friends, that's their protocol, at least when these kinds of things happen. Because this isn't the first time this has happened. This has come up and this has happened, where we've had some kind of avian type flu or disease or virus that we have to be cautious about. So some you can still come over, but they're just not going to take you out to the chicken coops. When there are some other things you can do, like the quarantine. If you buy new chickens, if you actually are able to get your hands on some new chickens these days, definitely, absolutely quarantine them for no less than 3 weeks. And means having
No, what do you mean by quarantine?
Means they are in a spot where, you really do have a separate coop area or some kind of crate or someplace where you can keep the chickens for up to 3 weeks without them having contact either through you or through the chickens directly with your other chickens.
If you have other chickens, okay.
If you have other chickens and, you're going to want to quarantine them just to make sure nothing pops up. Every chicken flock has its own flora. I'm just going to use that word, flora and germs and, microbes and everything in between. It's kind of like the kindergarten class, right? Where every family has their own germs. They've, maybe had different colds. And when everybody gets together, right, in one space or when they commingle, the kids in the classroom, they're spreading those germs, right? So that's what you're trying. It's the same kind of thing same concept where you're wanting to minimize the exposure to your current flock, knowing that their germs could be different from, at a very basic level, different from the flock that you just brought in or the birds that you just brought in. Means taking extra time, extra precautions, because you have to think about, okay, what's at risk, right? And someone might go, gosh, they're just my backyard chickens. But what happens if they are sick? It might not be the avian flu, but something else. And now your flock that you've had for 2 years, they're laying great eggs, and now they're all sick and they're dying. Are you willing to put that flock at risk? And so that's where you've got to kind of weigh out your line of, okay, what do you want to do and what are you willing to do and what are you not willing to do?
There is some good information still on the CDC about the bird flu and the current situation and what you can do to protect yourself too from spreading it or getting it just in case. And that's cdc.gov/bird flu if you want to check that out. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. I just hope it's still there, folks, when this airs.
If not, they will be able to find the information one way or another. And I think the biggest thing you can do as a poultry owner is understand and learn how to recognize a sick chicken and if your chicken's not feeling good. But there's a caveat to that. And that is that you have to understand that chickens are very, very, very good at hiding when they're ill or they're not feeling well. They're so good at it. And that's because the rest of the flock is going to know instantly if something's wrong. And then they'll typically not want that chicken as part of their flock because they don't want to get sick. Or they don't, it's part of that protective, mechanism with the flock mentality. As a chicken owner, what you're looking for is is there a bird standing off by themselves, right? Is there a chicken in your flock that's been pushed out because they're not feeling good? And that's usually one of the first things, because if you notice, a flock of chickens will typically move together, right? They may kind of do their own thing here and there, but they're still kind of moving as a group. So if you have one chicken that's kind of behind, and especially if they're facing away from the flock, that could mean that there's something going on with that chicken. You also watch, as funny as it sounds, you watch their body language. So you watch that chicken. Are they kind of hunched over? Are they kind of lower to the ground than normal? They're not their usual fluffy, exuberant, energetic selves. And it's kind of like when we get sick, right? If we have a cold or if we're sick, how do we feel? How do we act? If you have a bad cold or flu, what are you going to do? You're going to try to wrap yourself up with a blanket. You're going to be kind of hunched down. You're going to want to get cozy. That's what a chicken does. It's kind of funny. But you're watching for that. You're watching for, are they more fluffed up than normal? Is their head kind of lowered versus more upright? And are they interacting with the other chickens, or are they trying to stay off by themselves? Now, the thing to know is, like I mentioned, that chickens are really, really, really good at hiding those symptoms. So by the time you notice that a chicken's doing these things, there's a good chance they've been sick for a while. But if you notice that, first thing you're going to want to do is pick up that chicken. What's their weight like? Are they underweight? Are they overweight? Then I'm looking at the vent. I'm looking to see, is there any extra discharge? Is there poop stuck to their feathers? What is that? What's going on there? And then I'm looking at their head. I'm looking at their eyes. I'm looking at their nostrils. Is there anything coming? Because chickens should have dry nostrils. They shouldn't have anything, dried around them or wet. And then I'm listening, because you shouldn't be able to hear your chicken breathe. Your chicken's breathing should be silent.
Oh.
And if you can hear any gasping or gurgling or any noise associated with their inhaling and exhaling, it's typically the sign of a respiratory illness. So if you're watching for this, and then this kind of fits in well with people who really, love their chickens. They love to just sit in the backyard with their cup of coffee and watching their chickens do their thing. You'll begin to notice when something's not behaving, when one of the chickens are not behaving the way they should, or they're just not acting normal. That's the first indicator that, you may notice as a chicken owner that something's wrong. So then you take that hen or that rooster or whoever it is, that chicken, no matter what their age, you're going to quarantine them. So have a spot in your garage or someplace separate from that chicken coop where, a dog crate works really great, where you can keep them warm. You can offer them food and water, and you can monitor whether or not they're eating or drinking, as well as what their output is. So what does their poop look like? And are they lethargic? Are they energetic? All those things kind of weigh in. But if people learn how to recognize those signs of if their chicken is feeling okay or not, or maybe they're ill, that will help them, at least it'll buy them some time to maybe go see an avian vet, or, maybe do some research on what's going on. And then their second job as a poultry owner is to watch the rest of the flock. Mm-hmm. Because if they have something contagious, this might not be just the first one. And you want to know right away if any of the other chickens are having problems.
I would think during this whole process, if you think you see a sick bird on your property, one of your chickens, is perhaps you don personal protective equipment.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing. You should already have some biosecurity practices in place, right? Like the shoes, the foot bath, that kind of thing. It's because you never know when something like this is going to come up. And so, already have those things in place. But you want to make sure that you have a spot that you can have your chicken, right, be in quarantine.
Right.
Because the worst thing in the world is you go out there and like, what is wrong with that chicken? And then you realize, oh, shoot, there's something going on with that chicken. I need to now isolate this chicken from the rest of the flock. And now you're trying to, okay, where do I put the chicken? You're holding the chicken. You're trying to dig out the dog crate and your hands are full. As a chicken owner, it behooves us to have these things ready just in case. I like to plan. I like to prepare. So for me, that kind of comes naturally, but it might not come naturally for everyone. But just know that you might need to have those things ready.
At the CDC website that talks about protect yourself from bird flu for backyard flock owners, they have a picture of a person wearing personal protective equipment. before they handle a sick bird, and they have safety goggles, an N95 respirator, coveralls, disposable gloves, and of course the rubber boots.
Oh, yes. Well, and if you go to one of their, so what's kind of great is that we have labs throughout the state. The closest one to us, you and I, there's one in Davis and there's one down in Turlock, California. And these labs they used to be free, but now I think it's $20 for up to 2 birds. So when you go to their center to drop off a bird for diagnosis or for necropsy, they have a car washing station. So you can wash the tires of your vehicle as you come in and then also as you leave. And that's all for biosecurity to make sure that you're not tracking something in that maybe happened to, get on your tires.
I would imagine there's places like that throughout the country. What are they normally called if a person wanted to go to one?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think each state might have different terminology or different names for them. But even Googling it in our own state can be kind of tricky to find.
The California Department of Food and Agriculture does run an office called the California Animal Health and Food Safety Laboratory, which offers the necropsy and other testing service for poultry owners.
It is. So there we go. Initials CAHFS.
Oh, good.
They make it really challenging to find
initials.
It online.
Yeah. So again, that's the California Animal Health and Food Safety Laboratory. Your state will probably have different names wherever you might be listening. Probably a good term for Googling to find one near you would be poultry diagnostic labs.
That would probably be the best place to start. Yes. Yes. And they will have instructions typically, and you can either bring in a live bird. They have you leave it at a certain spot, and then they, will come out and get the bird. The live bird will not be returned to you because they do perform a necropsy. So they gently euthanize it using gas, and they will then, basically take a look at the bird and see what they find. They'll send things off, samples off for diagnosis. And then they'll get back to you. They actually send you a very nice report, and they keep on top of it. They're pretty good. They're vets. The vets that are located within these programs are usually really wonderful. They love to talk to the poultry owner and as well as, perform these tests. Now, what people don't know sometimes is that you don't have to bring a live bird. If you've had a bird die recently, like in the last few days or a week, you can actually put it in your refrigerator, and they'll accept them even after they've died.
Would you put this chicken in the refrigerator or the freezer?
Not the freezer.
Not the freezer. Okay.
Not the freezer. And that's because the freezer will tend to damage tissue, makes it much more difficult to thaw out and then retrieve the samples. So refrigerated only. I think you can buy like large 2-gallon Ziploc bags that most chickens will fit into. This is kind of morbid, but you want to put it in a refrigerator. And then they actually have specific instructions on how to submit your chicken if it's already passed on. So they do want you to, you can put in some cold packs as long as it doesn't freeze the tissue. It can't, you have to kind of insulate the chicken, and you can even FedEx the chicken to their lab. They will give you instructions. And what people have asked me in the past is they're like, well, if FedEx asked me what this is, the contents, what am I supposed to say? And just put laboratory sample on it. That's what you do, is you put laboratory sample. They don't need to know that there's a dead chicken in the box.
That's important. I've noticed online that a lot of these poultry testing operations are connected with schools of veterinary medicine. And so if there's a university in your area that has a good vet program, they may have more information for you about how to take care of this bird flu issue that you might have.
Yeah. And there'll be a form that you'll complete no matter what, and give them as much information as possible. So things that they're going to ask are, what's the history of the flock? What size is the flock? Duration of the illness? Did you euthanize the bird, or what was the date of death? They want to know if you were was there any treatment or medications that you already tried? And then they might even ask you, what diseases or conditions do you suspect? right? Have you had any other birds in your flock, that have gotten sick or have died recently? Because those numbers also give them an idea of what's going on, because there are some diseases or conditions that come on rapidly. So for instance, if you go out and suddenly, oh my gosh, 10 birds of yours are dead within a week, that's urgent. That's where you're wanting to get a hold of them and let them know, because something's going on. And usually that's an indicator of how quickly something does spread, but they're going to want to know all the details. And I would share as much with them as you can, because that's going to give them insight. They're going to want to know about, was there any discharge? Was there anything else that you noticed behavioral wise and that kind of thing? Because all that information helps them figure out what's going on or what happened with your chicken.
Anything vital we should throw in?
Basically, chickens that don't feel well will be a little depressed, right? But depressed and kind of not a little bit lethargic, not as active. They don't necessarily have an appetite. They might have diarrhea. You could notice something like sudden death or even soft eggs. That's how it can manifest. But the signs and symptoms that we talked about earlier with the breathing, what does their nostrils look like? What's their typical demeanor? I think are all important things to look for. And you want to know what's healthy and what's not healthy. So something to consider is that wild birds, and again, we're under the main flyway for waterfowl, right? In our area, a particular area of California. So those wild birds, they may actually look healthy, but they are still possibly carrying the virus. And so things as simple as washing hands, foot baths, having a specific pair of shoes just for your poultry yard and working with your chickens. But something else that comes up too is the duck hunters, right? We've just finished up, I think, duck season. And people sometimes don't think about that, but you're right there in the environment if you're a duck hunter. So you want to make sure that you keep even things like your clothes away from domestic poultry, because you could be the vector. You could be the person bringing that in if you have chickens in your backyard at home. But there is a bird hotline that you can call. There are lots of resources. And I think specifically in California, I don't think that those are going to go away, but there are things that they're updating. And even for me as a PHI, a poultry health inspector, we have resources too, but even then that information can get outdated very quickly, right? And I wouldn't believe everything you're reading online. I tend to stay with a lot of the government or the university data and information, but because again, people, there can be a lot of misinformation out there. And I'm definitely not one for fear mongering, right? I don't want to spread misinformation or have people become, fearful, but you just want to be cautious. I think that's the best way to do it, at least to handle kind of what you feel you need to do to protect your flock the best.
And I would think just a good note for hunters, especially waterfowl hunters, is to clean your kill on site. Don't bring it home.
Right. Have a place to process.
Yes.
Process your birds before you put them in your freezer.
A lot of good information from Cherie Sintis-Glover. She runs a wonderful website called chickensforeggs.com. Cherie is a University of California certified poultry health inspector and a master beekeeper apprentice. Cherie Sintis-Glover. Check out our website, chickensforeggs.com. Lots of good information, Cherie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back, Fred. I appreciate it very much and have a wonderful day.